local area energy plans. So a bit of a mouthful. So as I said before, we will call them LAEP, and we'll try to avoid acronyms. So I would ask all the panelists to avoid acronym, please, because it's not easy. We all have different acronyms, so it's always good to try and avoid them. But for today's, we'll just say LAEP for local area energy plans. Now onto the subject. So the UK has pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, and local authorities have a very important role to play. They have multiple levers at their disposal to influence carbon emission and capture. They manage their direct emissions. They can also influence local greenhouse gas emissions, energy production, and use of carbon intensive activities through planning, local action, and investment. So really, they are considered to have three key roles: enabling, advising, and investing in the energy future at local level. Yet, whilst the goal remains clear, there are considerable complexities. And for one, the fact that the UK has a centralised energy supply, so a shift to a more localised approach, which constitutes a significant material change in the UK's energy system. Now, whilst 75% of local authorities have declared climate emergencies, there is substantial variations in terms of commitment and capabilities of delivery. So really, it is in that context that local area energy plan, LAEP, have been put forward, and that's why we're very eager to discuss them now. So we have assembled a fantastically knowledgeable members here, and the idea is to deep dive on the subject, and I will ask them to all introduce themselves individually. So shall we start with you, Julia? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Julia Journey from the Oh, sorry, I can hear my voice coming back. I don't know. Thank you. I'm Julia Journey from the Centre for Sustainable Energy, also known as CSE. We're an independent national charity that works towards tackling climate change and fuel poverty. I'm a senior project manager in the research and analysis team, and I've been leading our local area energy planning work for the last few years. We started 2019, we delivered a report for Bristol. It was called Bristol the Road Net Zero to 2030. And that was kind of a precursor of its kind. And it started thinking about decarbonising the various vectors of the local energy system. And this, following on from that, in 2020, we co-authored with the Energy System Catapult the LAEP method, so the local energy planning method. And then since then, we've been involved in a lot of activity around this. We've evaluated LAEPs written by others. We've produced the first borough-wide LAEP in London, and various net zero strategies across the country that might not be labelled LAEPs, but they're very similar to what that is. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Julia. Graham?
Hi, I'm Graham Oakes. I'm an independent consultant. I got into the energy sector around about 10 or 11 years ago when I responded to a challenge prize run by Nesta. And that response turned into a startup called Upside Energy, which is now called Krakenflex since Octopus Energy acquired it about 3 years ago. I've now gone back to being an independent consultant around data and tech, but I currently support 6 startups through the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero's NZIP program, and a couple of other startups direct. I also work with Northern Power Grid on their plans for the current price control run by Ofgem.
Thanks, Graham. Kat and Lorenza?
Thank you, Isabel, and hi everybody. I'm Lorenza, and yes, Kat is also joining me. We're from Carbon COP, and we are an energy services and advocacy cooperative. We are members own and run, and the cooperative as an organisation, it helps householders and communities make the carbon reductions that are needed to really tackle the runaway climate emergency that we're facing. I lead on the Energy Commons, and Energy Commons is really looking at resources, energy resources, and the democratization and the voices of citizens in the energy transition, and to ensure that it's a just and fair and equitable transition. We also have the energy systems team to really understanding the energy responses and that transition, and then the retrofit team that really understands the strategies and the implementations of specific but also at scale changes that we need to do to our buildings in order, to contribute to the reduction of carbon as well. With regards to the LEAP, we've been working for a number of years now developing a methodology called community-led energy planning, and that really supplements and complements, I should say, the LEAP methodology. And it really starts from the bottom up, engaging with citizens and residents, working with them, seeing them as experts and knowledgeable of their area and their needs, their assets of the community, and really to involve them in those conversations and that learning and knowledge about the energy transition. And when we're talking about infrastructure, net zero projects, and the LEAP strategies that local authorities are looking to implement, the community-led energy planning aim is to support those conversations to be really meaningful and very helpful in the delivery of those infrastructure projects that the LEAP are shaping up in order to function well, but also for the communities and the citizens to receive that best benefit as well from those projects. So that's the point of view that we're bringing to the panel today.
Thank you. Kat, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I work with Lorenza on the as part of the Energy Commons team. I'm a project officer at Carbon Co-op. Yeah, and I've been working with piloting these kind of methodologies around community-led energy planning.
Fantastic, thank you. Samantha?
Sure. Hi, Samantha Nichol. I'm also a freelance consultant. I work with a range of clients, so local authorities, startups, various sort of energy retailers, all around either energy strategy, innovation, and decarbonisation. So I guess in this context, I've worked a lot with Greater Manchester Combined Authority on the development of their LAEPs, and actually working with Graham and Lorenza and Kat on that. So we go back. And I've also worked with the Energy Systems Catapult a number of times as well. So I guess a general knowledge in the space from energy retail to local authorities and how they work, and some startups as well.
Amazing, thanks. And Peter?
Hi folks, thanks for having me. I'm Peter Graham, so I work for Energy Systems Catapult. For those that don't know, we're a not-for-profit independent research and technology organisation, and our mission is to accelerate net zero energy innovation. So in the local context, that really means ensuring that every local area in the UK is investing in actions that are based on robust whole system plans. So for me personally, my background is in systems engineering, and I currently work at the sort of technical commercial interface, helping local authorities to deliver on their energy decarbonisation ambitions, and that includes leading on two of our current LEAPs that we're delivering, one in Belfast and one for Lancaster District.
Thanks, Peter. And thank you very much for all these introductions, and thank you very much for taking the time to come today. It's fantastic to have you. So I will start by asking you, Julia, kind of a more generic and scene-setting question around the local area energy plans, and how do they relate to the current national energy policy?
Thank you, Isabel. Yeah, so for, I guess most people know, but for those who don't, local area energy planning really is a framework that seeks to inform and shape and enable what we need to do in the transition to a net zero energy system. So these frameworks made out of four main elements, and these are robust technical evidence base, so that's data driven and is formed sort of bottom up, as Lorenza said earlier, and it seeks to identify what technology changes are needed for net zero. It's important we recognise the strengths and limitations of these evidence base, and that it's taken alongside the other 3 elements. So the second element is a comprehensive assessment of wider non-technical factors. So these are the factors that should frame the technical analysis, and they should cover things such as the local and national policy and regulatory environment. There should be considerations of financial and commercial opportunities and or constraints. We should look at local initiative taking and local capabilities, what's on the ground now. And lastly, it should take into consideration the social demographic composition of the area. Alongside these two analyses, there should be a well-designed social process which starts either before the LAEP is delivered or at the very start of it. And this should ensure that all of the appropriate stakeholders are engaged from the outset, and that they really end up owning the plan at the end and championing it forward. And this sort of guarantees that it doesn't end up sitting on a shelf or as an online link somewhere. And then finally, the local area energy plan should be carefully consider its approach to governance and delivery. So ideally, it would contain at the end a route map with a series of actions that are owned by local stakeholders and beyond, and that focuses on the sort of actions that are needed in the next 2, 3, 4 years, so the immediate term, to make sure that we keep momentum and the plan gets implemented as soon as possible. So if done well, if the LAPs, if a local area energy plan is done well, it can provide sort of a shared purpose for local stakeholders and beyond, and a clear plan to implement the changes needed to achieve net zero. What it can do is, within the wider national policy context, as you asked, Isabel, it does complement, like local area energy planning should complement national policy. It should support it in achieving the UK net zero targets, and it should help speed the energy transition. So that's on a high level what it should do. In practice, what the local energy plans should do, they should inform place-based decisions towards the decarbonisation of local energy systems, which altogether will form the national energy systems. And they should look at the main sources of emissions, which are identified normally as coming from heating buildings, transport, and the wider power systems. As I said, if they're designed within a thorough social process, not only we will have the stakeholders deliver these LAPs, but it will also generate public consent and really distill down to the local communities, because we need to recognise that they will be key in the transition to net zero, because these plans will contain changes that individual people need to make, so we all get there. And it should also recognise wider co-benefits for communities, like reduced fuel poverty or improved air quality, creation of skills and employment, education, and there's a long list of wider benefits that they can create. So yeah, I think that's in a nutshell what we feel that local area energy planning brings to the discourse and to national policy.
Thanks, Julia. And obviously there are several schemes around and plans around energy. And Graham, would you tell us what is already on the way in the UK, both at national and regional level? And how do they compare to their LAEP or LAEPs? We all use different ways of calling them.
Sure, Isabel. So the heart of energy system planning right now in the UK is what's called future energy scenarios. And the National Energy System Operator, which is currently part of National Grid, produces a set of top-down scenarios. Each of the regional distribution network operators, which there are 6 in the UK, produce more bottom-up distribution level energy future scenarios. And each of those is a view as to what might happen out. Typically, they look on a horizon out to about 2050. But these are very much scenarios that each system operator produces typically 4 scenarios, range based on what they think might happen with hydrogen, what they might think with heating, questions like that. But it's not really a plan, it's just a question of what might happen. From there, each of the system operators then produces a network options assessment and a network development plan that plans how they're going to build all the cables and the wires and substations and things like that needed to deliver under those scenarios, or what they see as those preferred scenarios. But none of this really asks the question of what should happen. It's all what might happen. And this is where I think LEAPs really bring something new to the party, because this is a chance to go to people and say, what do you want to happen in order to achieve net zero? So the future energy scenarios may say, we think EV growth will go in this direction or it'll go in that direction, but it doesn't say we actually want EV growth to happen at a certain rate. We can talk to people, we can say, we want as a community the rate of EV deployment to go up at this level. And then to achieve that, we may need to improve the EV charging infrastructure. And then this inputs into the network plans saying we want to have charging infrastructure in these areas because there isn't enough public charging there, or whatever else. Right now, that there's nothing like that really well structured that feeds into the network's planning. And so I think that's what LEAPs bring to the party. There's another energy system process that is currently being developed called a national spatial energy plan, which looks at what we need to do to connect offshore wind farms and build all the big transmission level infrastructure and build a spatial plan for that. But again, that's a very top-down process. It's not about engaging with people about what they want to happen in their area. It's about looking at where do we think as a nation we need to be by 2030, 2035, 2050, and then how do we build the infrastructure to do that. But again, it needs to be grounded in what people want to happen in their own area, and that's what LEAPs are really bringing to us, I think.
Thanks a lot. Very, very interesting. And the engagement with community is really, really important. Lorenza, Kat, obviously that kind of lies very much within your remit. Would you tell us, how you engage with the different stakeholders? What have you found to be the most efficient or the best ways to get buy-in?
Yeah, I can answer that question. Oh, I thought I'd just start by kind of outlining the different stakeholders involved in producing a LEAP. So generally, local authorities are the kind of key drivers of developing them, and they tend to initiate the project and take it through to its kind of completion. They're the ones who tend to kind of convene the kind of meetings and workshops, and often in a lot of past LEAPs, they've brought in external consultants to help with data analysis and sort of modelling of these energy scenarios. And they're complemented with the DNOs, the district network operators. So they've been involved in providing kind of the technical advice around the kind of current infrastructure capabilities and some of the constraints around the existing network, and also sharing what they are investing in the future. So they're kind of working in line with the local authorities. And then there's other different stakeholders involved, like ourselves, as like a energy cooperative. So we sort of bring that understanding of engaging with communities in the process, and we're really keen to see this kind of community-led energy process being integrated into the development of the LEAP. So supporting people to understand what this energy transition means to them, how they can be involved, how they can help to shape projects in their local area, and also gain an understanding of what the different types of projects may be delivered as part of the LEAP interventions. So things like local energy generation projects, and energy efficiency retrofit projects. So that kind of, we as community energy organisations sort of bring that. Then there's social housing providers who have a good connection with their tenants, and they can understand those needs and aspirations of them, and deliver kind of social housing retrofit in the area, so they can bring in that kind of expertise into the LEAP process and understand where are the focus areas kind of through a place-based approach, and how that can help to kind of reduce, you know, the energy, get to net zero really, through their building assets. And then there's also these large kind of industrial and commercial users. So how what their kind of their energy use patterns are, they bring that in as sort of their data, how they can develop kind of demand reduction scenarios through the kind of LEAP, and then how what kind of energy projects are they going to be developing as the kind of if in this timeline of the energy transition. And then also within the local council itself, there's a lot of data sharing and collaboration. So between different departments, like the planning department, integration with like the local plan, looking at kind of transport, housing, environment departments, making sure that it's sort of integrated across kind of different policy areas. So this is all kind of acting through like different workshops and sort of different engagements. And I think in terms of effective, so the effective stakeholder engagement process, I think it's a really collaborative effort in the LEAP. It's really about engaging stakeholders at an early stage and taking them through a journey. So successful LEAPs really share what the LEAP is for, and make sure that those stakeholders know, you know, what is the purpose of the LEAP, how they can be involved during the development and also after in its implementation. So, you know, we're still at that kind of early stage at the moment of seeing where that's going to go, and how people are involved in that process. So I think it'll be it's an interesting time to see actually how effective these LEAPs are going to be in delivering net zero. Also thinking about the engagement process, how inclusive it can be, so making sure that as part of it, you are reaching people who maybe voices aren't being heard in the process, and really trying to understand what those kind of barriers and enablements are. I know Graham mentioned that, you know, it's really important to sort of make sure that there's multiple perspectives and that there's like a community engagement process as well in that process of developing the LEAP. I think that's something we really want to test over the next 2 years, that community-led energy planning process and how that can really work in tangent with the LEAP process. And there's a lot of kind of knowledge sharing in the LEAP process that we can do. Testing pilot projects as well as part of the kind of LEAP, or getting people to kind of give feedback on potential scenarios. That's really important. Clear communication of data sharing. I think it's one of the benefits of LEAP processes is really that there's a process of gathering all this data and being able to help support and share that data with other stakeholders can enable other stakeholders to develop actions from that. So that's sort of also really key. And yeah, getting kind of from being involved in kind of LEAP engagement processes, it's really useful to have feedback loops as well. So knowing where it's up to, understanding what your role is as an organisation in the LEAP, that's really great to know. Yeah, so those are some of the things that we've captured.
Thank you, thanks, Kat. And I think, you know, community engagement is so important and so interesting. And I think we could spend a whole session on community engagement and on making sure that there is inclusivity in that. But it's not the purpose of today. We might do another session around that later on. But back on the kind of a more LEAP, obviously a few LEAPs have been implemented already. And it would be interesting to hear from you, Sam, what have been the key factor for a successful implementation and what are the lessons learned so far?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is, you know, the LAEP and the LAEP processes are still very much in a sort of infancy of being used. You know, a handful of kind of places across the UK are in the process of implementing them. But by no means can we say anywhere has now, you know, achieved net zero and, you know, fully implemented the plan. I think there's a couple of things just to point out from bits that were sort of not focused on in kind of various other conversations so far. So one that's kind of highlighted this complexity of multiple stakeholders. So, you know, I have a colleague that always says it'd be easier if it was a dictatorship. Obviously, we'd want it to be a benevolent one, but we have so many stakeholders, so many different ownership levels, and so many different things that it's not yet a sort of plan that you can go, right, okay, we're implementing it. It's somewhere between I think it's somewhere about setting a stake in the ground to say this is the direction we're going, bringing people along that journey, but recognizing that it isn't an easy, we can put, you know, 10 wind turbines here and 10 solar panels there and insulate a few homes and we'll be done. That's not what these are designed to do, nor should we expect them to be able to achieve that. I think the second piece of the puzzle that we haven't touched on yet is around investment and investor confidence. So some of the benefits we're seeing in Manchester and Greater Manchester around developing them is it provides the scope of the opportunity to bring in investment and capital to start to say, well, where are the projects we can get started on? Where are the no regrets move? Where do we need the influx of capital and sort of get those projects off the ground? So for me, again, success is starting to deliver projects, recognizing that it won't all be delivered at once, and there's a long journey, and there's some that are easy and some that are hard, and recognizing that in terms of bringing in investment. Also, some opportunities are commercial now, some are likely to be commercial in the next number of years, and some we probably recognize will never be commercial, and we need to understand how, you know, either investors, governments, or citizens are willing to fund that gap. But what LAEPs do is start to bring out those issues and those points and understand what we're working with. And so for me, that's really, for me, a successful LAEP is a decision-making tool as much as a plan to understand what we're working with, you know, the initial lay of the land and some easy wins, or maybe not easy, nothing's easy in this space, but some things that can be achieved now. And then the recognition that the sort of plan will need to be revised and iterated as we go. But I think, you know, the thing that Lorenza, Julia, and Kat have really emphasized, well, and Graham, to be fair, is sort of bringing people along that journey. I think for me, another kind of key important task of a successful LAEP is having a key sponsor, so someone that really believes in it and drives it and understands its benefits and its weaknesses and tries to kind of move that forward. I think collectively it's about understanding that, you know, the first iteration is never going to be perfect, but what can we do to kind of move that along? I think I'll stop there and wait for questions, because I could probably talk for ages, but hopefully that sets out a few points.
That's great, Sam, thanks. Peter, given your work at the Energy Systems Catapults, could you walk us through the existing guidance for LEAP and how they're currently commissioned? And what do you feel has worked so far, and, you know, what can be improved?
Okay, yep. So Energy Systems Catapult, we published our LEAP guidance a couple of years ago now, and that's to help organisations deliver LEAPs both consistently and with maximum impact. So our aim in that is to create a market for LEAP. So it's great to see the number of delivery organisations ramping up and also using that guidance, but also remembering that, you know, at the Catapult, we're not the regulators of the LEAP process, and nor should we be. However, we are seeing a lot more LEAP commissioning from combined authorities or even a regional national level coordination of LEAP. So Welsh Government have taken that approach to mandate LEAP across all 22 of their local authorities, and on the combined authority front, we've delivered LEAPs now in Greater Manchester, and there's LEAPs for Greater London Authority as well. So most of these are explicitly referring to that guidance and seems to be working well. So in terms of what is working well, that shows there is lots of momentum behind LEAP, and there's more and more delivery organisations coming online now and getting behind LEAP delivery and delivering to that guidance. And I think it's also fair to say that the main stages of the LEAP process, those 7 key stages, appear to still remain relevant. That seems to be working in practice, and especially that crucial focus on continuous stakeholder engagement, and that's now obviously cropped up a few times now in our panelists' responses. So I think helping stakeholders understand how they can, well, first of all, recruiting them to be a part of the LEAP, helping them understand what their role is in creating, but also even in post-LEAP delivery and implementation. That seems to be a part that's really working well, and getting that kind of inclusive aspect going. Some of the things then that are maybe not going so well. So LEAPs are not always consistent in terms of the outputs that are being produced, and maybe in terms of their robustness. So maybe there's some improvements to be made there in the guidance. LEAP can also be perceived, rightly or wrongly, as being a little on the slow side, and also the focus on delivering it as tends to be as a static document. So I think we really need to move away from that document-centric approach in our outputs towards being more agile and data-centric, and that probably means an emphasis on support and visualization platforms, and that will enable a much more dynamic approach. And so we're considering publishing a refresh to our guidance in the near future, and we're also looking at defining what good looks like in terms of LEAP to help sort of guide that consistency and the robustness in the process. But for sure, the challenge ahead is striking that balance between standardisation and flexibility, because we still want to allow delivery organisations to be innovative and crucially to be allowed to apply that level of tailoring to each local area, which is really crucial.
Thanks, Peter. And you've definitely highlighted some of the challenges, but Sam, you mentioned also earlier on challenges around making sure to have a sponsor. Are there any other challenges that you see, you know, in implementing a LEAP? And I'll open to the floor to everybody, but start with Sam.
Sure. Well, I think we've touched on them. I think, you know, there is a challenge around the sort of static versus dynamic view of it. So there's always a trade-off between a plan that's set in stone and something that's adapts to kind of the reality and the movement. So I think there's challenges around that. I think the biggest challenge is, and I alluded to this earlier, the energy system is very complex. Well, it's not that complex, but there are a lot of stakeholders and a lot of different interests. So, you know, if you think about one infrastructure project, there's a number of factors that come with that. So it would be a lot, you know, the challenges around how do you create a whole systems view that takes into everybody's kind of interests, stakeholders, commercial, while balancing sort of the need to just get things done and get things moving. And I think both, you know, that's one of the biggest challenges in LAEPs. And then you can add in all the pieces around data and you know, complexity and governance. But I think ultimately it's, you know, how do you align interests and make sure that you make the right decisions first for everybody?
I see loads of nodding. Any other? Obviously, that's definitely a challenge throughout, and I understand some your kind of your point on dictatorship, although it's not necessarily where we want to go. It would in some ways make things easier. But has anyone got any other challenges in mind? Lorenza.
Okay, I mean, I think also, and it picks up on what Sam said, but especially Peter, what we've learned through the work that we've been developing and delivering already on the community-led energy planning is the differences between a LEAP approach in terms of understanding the geography, which obviously is a borough scale, it's a high level scale, and the data is driven at that scale. And then understanding the more granular level at district or even ward scale. So how you take a LEAP, which is a roadmap, at borough scale, so local authorities led, and then understanding that when you're looking at any kind of communities, a large city or a town or even rural, when you then drive down to the communities per se, there is that complexity. Actually, I think, Sam, you're right. There is complexities in how each community needs are and assets. So being able to give the local authorities especially that confidence in then how they take that LEAP strategy down to each particular district or particular ward, that's also a challenge in the sense that data can also support it, but this is also where citizens can really come in, because engagement with communities can really give that richness of understanding of the needs of communities, and then how you translate, that's what I was trying to say, I think you translate the LEAP strategy at delivery scale within communities.
Translation is a key point here. Peter, Sam, I think you had your hand up earlier, but then you kind of lowered it. What do you want to do?
Yeah. I'm happy to go ahead. I think the other piece, and it's not necessarily directed to LAEPs, but generally our whole road to decarbonisation is, the need for energy efficiency in people's homes, right? Which is, as much as we can talk about energy systems and have it be infrastructure, actually we're talking about people's homes and the need to do things, that don't necessarily have a financial return and also cost time, energy, effort. It is your house, or one's house, and then there's a number of complexities around that. So I think it's also to remember that a plan from an infrastructure perspective is very different than how we necessarily make decisions in our own homes.
I agree. It's back to retrofit. And Peter, do you have?
Yeah, so I think that last point there from Sam is brilliant, and it could definitely lead to a whole new session, because I think one challenge is definitely around not pushing, kind of all of the decarbonisation action onto homeowners and businesses, and it can be challenging to really get that balance right. But the point I was going to come in and make is that certainly another challenge in terms of balance is to what extent, a LEAP is a high-level strategic plan, but you also need to make it real. And you can see that the stakeholder engagement really ramps up when you do make it real. So it's getting that balance between having everything at a bit of a bird's eye view, which means it stands a better chance of having a long shelf life, versus drilling down and giving that extra layer of detail that people go, now we actually know within our own local context, we can relate to this, we can get on, we can take action. But what that opens up then is it does open up the risk that actually 6, 12 months, 2 years after delivery, the LEAP is out of date. And again, it sort of plays back to the point that I said at the end there, that we're vulnerable to that because we are in a situation right now, for a number of reasons, that LEAPs tend to be delivered as kind of 50 to 100 page documents, and they're very static. So I really think that this move towards more digital focused outputs, building capacity in local authorities so that they actually know what to do with those outputs as well. So we use the analogy that at the moment it's possible that we're giving local authorities and those stakeholders a fish, when in fact we should be teaching them how to fish. So I think that capacity building has to happen, and has to happen on top of tools and platforms and processes that they can understand themselves and go and use, keep the LEAP alive, keep it relevant, dynamic, allow it to change as emerging circumstances change after the LAEP is delivered.
Thanks, Peter. Graham?
So a few points. When we talk a lot about using data for the LAEPs, and I think we shouldn't underestimate just how bad the current data is. Half their cost, I suspect, of every LAEP is just getting and cleaning data. And so improving the underlying data infrastructure would do a lot to reduce the cost of LAEPs and then make them something that you could do on an ongoing iterative basis. Because if you've got to keep gathering that data, then that's an overall drag on the process. There's also a lot of things like boundaries, and we talked about lots of different bodies that need to be involved, but the boundary of the Transport Authority isn't necessarily the same as the boundary of the local authority, and the electricity network's boundary isn't necessarily coterminous with the local authority. The gas network's boundary is different again, and agreeing just what area actually you're going to look at can be surprisingly complex when you drill into this. And there's also a question of scale. Most LAEPs seem to be being done at about the borough or the local authority level. But I've worked in Oxfordshire on LAEPs that were done at the parish, effectively at the parish level. And there are benefits of going down to that level in terms of people's engagement. You can engage with what's happening on my street in my local park in a way that's something that, you know, local authority may be 20 miles away, and you just can't engage in that in the same way. So that ability to drill down, but still to be able to step back and take the strategic view that Peter talked about, getting that balance right is still something we've got to work on.
And it's interesting because it's coming through lots of different issues. Obviously, the different in terms of boundaries and working, you know, outside boundaries and collaborating with others. We had a positive impact panel session a month ago around biodiversity net gain, which is obviously the same thing. You know, biodiversity doesn't stop at a boundary line, so it's really about kind of crossing those boundaries. Julia.
Hi, I just wanted to pick up on some of what has been said. Just from the point of view of a local authority, I think the biggest challenges, which then link to many other challenges that have been discussed, is just they're relating to funding and resourcing. So as Graham said, you know, the data can be very expensive. The most expensive part of an LAEP is the technical analysis. That could be streamlined in some of that could be streamlined. There could be other ways of funding it. Local authorities don't, I mean, a lot of local authorities have commissioned LAEPs, but there are over 300 in England, and most of them don't have the money to commission LAEPs, and they're looking at other options, whether they can do a part of an LAEP or what they can do. And I think the other big challenge, as Sam was saying, is just related to what Sam was saying about the complexity of an LAEP and bringing together all these stakeholders and sort of driving it forward. I think that reflects the fact that every LAEP that is delivered needs a lot of involvement from the local authority, a lot of time, like officer time spent on it. It needs senior buy-in. It just needs so much resourcing, and for them to keep driving it forward. So even when they get to the end and they've got this LAEP and they're like, oh, what do we do now? And to figure out what to do next and to drive it forward, they still need that resourcing. And I think that is one of the main challenges that many are facing, even some that have delivered LAEPs, but they don't have the resourcing or the internal drive to then implement them. And so, yeah, those are the two biggest ones that I think local authorities are facing at the moment.
Thanks, Julia. So if I go back on the point of data, which is really one of the ways to reduce cost or if good quality data, obviously OS is data focused. Our data, as you know, is authoritative and is of good quality and maintained. But if you had kind of magic wand, are there any data sets that you would want to have, or that you would think is like a key data set for you to, and I know I'm going totally off script, so I haven't, but yeah, just open question.
I think, oh, sorry, Graham. I think mine is quick. I mean, for me, one data set that could be a lot better and more useful is EPCs. So the relationship between, you know, what a house is actually, its actual standard. There's a lot of assumptions go into the formation of an EPC, but the actual data sets not really that consistent and representative. And I think above all, a lot of decisions that are made in the LEAP, and I suppose I'm referring here really to the kind of techno-economic assessment. A lot of the outputs from the modelling, maybe rather than saying decisions, a lot of the modelling outputs are so strongly led by EPCs, and if they're incorrect, it's a fundamental flaw in the process. So I would go with EPCs.
Graham?
I was going to say EPCs as well. Having EPCs integrated with all the other spatial data and having clean, up-to-date, believable EPC data would make a huge difference. I also think there's a lot of network data. The networks are getting better at publishing headroom on their networks and things like that. And a lot of this is metadata as well as data. Agreeing what is actually meant by headroom and the amount of capacity on the network. We saw this in Manchester, where even within the distribution network operator, we couldn't necessarily get agreement as to what their capacity on their various nodes in the network was. And then the catapult had a different view again as to what that meant. And so coming to a common understanding of what you would think it would be pretty basic, because this is it's a bunch of wires. We should know where the wires are and how thick they are and what their capacity is. But it's very hard to get agreement on that.
Interesting that there are discrepancies of that side. Julia and Kat, you had your hand up and you've lowered them. Did you want to add anything?
Oh, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong button. I think maybe I was going to move on. I don't know if it's moving on from the data question, but we've been discussing whether there could also be sort of nationwide modelling that could be streamlined. Like, why does every LAEP have to do the same? You know, why don't we have a national data set that shows the potential for solar PV panels across the country? You know, we're getting, obviously heat network zoning is going to be part of that when we get the outputs of that when they're ready. But I think it could cover a lot of the other elements of LAEPs. It could certainly cover many of the renewable energy technologies, and that would make LAEPs so much cheaper. Because there's a lot of money and effort that goes into creating those models and running them across the country. It made them cheaper, and then it would also allow streamlining them across the country. It would help with cross-border issues and opportunities. I think it would be helpful in many ways.
Peter?
Just to quickly come in on that point, if I took a more sort of optimistic view of things, I think Graham mentioned in his response at the start that the Electricity Network Commissioner's report has recommended a national level strategic energy plan. We know that the National Energy System Operator, currently under National Grid, as Graham also says, is looking at a regional whole systems spatial plan, and whatever that looks like. So it really looks like we're going to get to that point where we've got more joined up whole systems planning at scale, going from local to regional to national. And I'd be optimistic that that's going to help with data sets, standardization of assumptions, and that type of thing. But it goes a bit towards what Sam says. You know, we might say we're still in the infancy with LEAP, so we kind of have to just go with the flow whilst these sort of data sets aren't quite there. So I'd be optimistic that some of the LEAPs, maybe the earlier LEAPs that might be getting a refresh in the mid-2020s, which we're fast approaching, we're arguably in now, there will be better and better data sets every time coming around. People will have a better understanding of what a LEAP is and what it does, and really the data set might be that final piece in the puzzle. So I'm certainly quite optimistic on that.
Great to have a bit of optimism. Thanks, Peter. I think it really highlights the tension between like the national and regional, local, and very granular approach. Kat, did you want to say?
Yeah, I just know that some local authorities have been developing digital twins as well, and they're effective tools for kind of visualizing some of these changes in scenarios. And I think if local authorities could have access to, these kind of 3D models, that would be great as a way of like communicating. And yeah, I think definitely useful going forward for other local authorities.
Do you see it as an interesting way to communicate with communities, or?
Yeah, I think so. Because it's very visual.
Yeah, of course. Interesting. Great, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go around the room and ask you in 2 words to kind of tell me, how do you see the role of the LEAP in the next, or evolving in the next decade, and to meet the UK's net zero targets? And what do you believe are the critical factors to its success? So let's start with you, Peter. Well, I know, Peter, you have put your mic back off, but you were on, so.
Sorry, you're going to be, yep, okay. So yeah, I guess my 2 words would be dynamic and digital, which probably plays to what I've said before. I think we really need to give local authorities and other stakeholders more capability to use the data that's in the LEAP and keep it alive for a longer period of time, and also to enable that future refresh process. So when we get sort of disruptive things in the political or social or economic space, you can actually respond to that and almost query the LEAP and say, what would that do? To what extent does that affect in my local plan? I think in terms of critical success factors, I mean, right now, again, maybe this goes back to what Sam says, we can't say that LEAP is a success because look, there's a local area that's achieved net zero, right? That's a long way off. So we need to have metrics in the meantime. I think for me, the kind of 2 key metrics would be, to what extent is the LEAP adopted and accepted by the majority of stakeholders? And to what extent is there investment behind the recommendations and the projects in the LEAP? And I think that will determine the success. We're seeing that now. Some areas have built up investment, and their credit in the LEAP has been a crucial part of that. So the more that happens, the more we'll see success from LEAP.
Thanks, Peter. Lorenzo?
Sorry, I was just trying to find the unmute button. Well, I think maybe it won't be unsurprising. It will be community-led and just. And of course, I think that it's we discussed about it. The buy-in and the support from citizen is it's not just the right thing to do, but it actually going to deliver successful, energy transition. We know what happens when that support and buy-in and understanding from a citizen point of view isn't there, and what happens to projects, success. So I think it's that collaboration, it's creating that collaboration, and I think that it's actually very exciting. And with that on board, I think the LEAP can become real enabler, especially for local authorities, to have that kind of roadmap and guidance in actually how to make things happen as well. I don't know if Kat, you want to add anything on a Carbon Co-op hat?
You're on mute, Kat.
Yeah, to add, being dynamic and flexible to respond to changing scenarios, I think, especially like with changes in technology and advancements, I think being able to incorporate and integrate that within to upgraded LEAPs will be really important and key for local authorities.
Thanks, Kat. Sam?
I also agree with the dynamic one, but to pick 2 new words, I'll say kind of transparency and confidence. So having trust in the data, having trust in the plan, and that's with confidence to build out projects and make it, investment and get shovels in the ground. I think those are the 2 words that we need.
Thanks, Sam. Graham?
So my 2 words are data and engagement. All we've said about data, the need to have clean data, the need for it to be accessible, to have the analytical tools that people can use to manipulate and display that data, that's all going to be critical to LEAPs to achieve their potential. And engagement, I think use engagement, we talk about buy-in and getting people to sort of go along with the plans. I think it's actually got to be more than that. It really does have to be community-led, as Lorenza said. This is about what do we want to achieve as communities and as a society, not just what will we tolerate the energy system doing to us.
Thanks, Pam. And Julia, the last 2 words?
The last 2, I'd say widespread and actionable. So I think we need to make sure that all local authorities have an LAEP and that they have the resourcing to turn them into action. So I think, yeah, that would be a nice focus to have over the coming years.
Thanks, and that kind of concludes very well our session today. So thank you very much for your time today. It's been really a pleasure to speak and have you all on that panel, and really, really interesting. I've learned a lot. So thank you for your time.